Hey, FreeThinking Ministries. It is good to be a part. It's good to be with you this today. Whenever this is airing. My name is Josh Klein. I am your host here on FreeThinking Ministries YouTube, and I am joined by a fellow Josh today, Josh Daws. Let's bring him on here. Oops, that was not correct. There we go. Josh, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I follow you on formerly known as Twitter platform called X. Some of the people that listen to FreeThinking Ministries may not do that. They may not know who you are. I know you host it's the Great Awakening podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I don't know if you still call it that, but I've been aware of that for a few years. So why don't you tell our audience who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm the host of the Great Awakening podcast. Started that a few years ago, just because I saw a lot of worldly ideologies start to make their way into the church. My wife and I and our family, we lived out in Los Angeles for 7.5 years and kind of got a sneak preview at a lot of the stuff that eventually came to, churches across the country. And so once we moved back to Georgia and started seeing a lot of those ideas show up in otherwise conservative churches, I just felt the need to kind of speak up and kind of wave the warning flag, and been doing that for a few years now. And it's called the Great Awakening, and I'm just trying to help Christians understand the crazy culture that we're living in.
Yeah, that's great. That is what I do for FreeThinking Ministries here in the Midwest as well. So we're in Omaha, Nebraska. And so one of the things that we want to do is help the church to reason together concerning all these cultural issues. So I kind of do the same thing. I think I want more and more voices. And you don't have to be named Josh to have this voice. You can have a different name. Yeah, it does. It does help. We need more and more voices, faithful Christians that are willing to stand up in the face of what is really a deteriorating society. And the reason we're on today, there's a lot of issues that we could talk about. But when I connected with you, it was specifically about the upcoming election. You have to be living under a rock if you don't know that there is an upcoming election that's going to be happening in November, and how Christians ought to think about that. Now, Tim Stratton and I, my colleague, who was going to be a part of our conversation today, but he ended up having some things that he had to do. We wrote an article on our website called "A Moral Obligation to Vote for an Immoral Candidate." Really long title, but basically making the case that we specifically ourselves have a conscience-binding moral obligation to vote for Donald Trump, considering what the other side poses. And we received a lot of pushback from that article from evangelical people saying, well, Donald Trump's basically pro abortion, at least to a certain extent. He's basically pro-choice. His moral character is deeply flawed. He's going to be a tyrant. And so we've been kind of pushing back on that. It's interesting because where I live in Omaha, Nebraska's weird. So our state is not an electoral take-all state. You can actually have different delegates go to different places. So we have 5 electoral votes in the Electoral College, and 3 of them go to whoever wins the state overall, and then the next 2 go to whoever wins in the districts. So District 1, there is a distinct possibility that the election could actually come down to Omaha, Nebraska, District 1, if we get to 269, and it's a tie, right? And so we're kind of using our voice here in Nebraska to say, let's not let it get to that situation. All of that to say, I think we are on the same page here. We want to have a discussion on how Christians should engage politically. But before we shift to the national election, which is where we'll spend the bulk of our time today, how do you think, and how have you encouraged Christians to engage politically beyond the presidential election?
Yeah, well, and I think that is so important, because a lot of times we think that politics is something that happens every 4 years. And, you don't meet many Christians who would, argue that we don't have a duty to engage, politically and in civics, just as a citizen of the country. That is something that is expected of us as Christians and as citizens. But going any further beyond, voting in the general election every 4 years, or maybe primaries, there you don't hear much teaching, encouraging Christians to be involved beyond that. And I think that is definitely something that we need to, the church needs to be more engaged in. There needs to be more discipleship around that. Just because that's where the changes that we want to see are really going to happen. I think we have this mistaken belief that, well, we can send this complex, multifaceted message by how we vote in November, or how we choose not to vote. If we withhold votes, that's going to send this message, and that'll change party politics and give us the candidates we want to see. Well, that's not how it works. That vote in November is just registering your official preference between one of two administrations to govern us for the next 4 years. That's it. If we're not happy with the caliber of candidates we're getting, then we're going to have to become more involved in party politics, not less involved. And I think, the voices that are saying, well, we need to withhold, we need to send a message, are just not being realistic about how change at the party level actually happens.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I have a close friend that we've kind of gone back and forth on this, because he has said he's withholding his vote. He didn't vote for Trump in 16, 20, and he's not planning to vote for him in 24. Now, he lives in a very red state, and so he has admitted that gives him a certain amount of freedom in certain circumstances to do that. But that's what his thought is. If you vote for third party, even if your person doesn't win, it sends a message to the national platform. And him and I disagree on that. I've told him, I think when we vote in the presidential election, it's just a tally mark. That's all it is. It's not a message. Yeah. It's a tally mark for whoever, between two options, for whoever we think can govern best. If we want to send a message, we need to get involved in our school board voting. We need to get involved in our local legislation voting and put up good candidates there. And I encourage people to do that. I think a lot of times evangelicals, and for some, it's funny because our founding fathers, if they knew how much preference we put to the presidential election, they would probably roll over in their graves, because they go, no, this isn't supposed to be the most important election. It's supposed to be your state elections that are more important. Because, we even used to select senators through state legislatures. And so we've broadened that out. And I think we've also made very, very specific theological issues into political issues at the church level. And one of those issues that we're going to talk about is abortion. A church in in Nebraska, recently didn't host a petition for a pro-life petition because they didn't want to be perceived as political, so that they would be open to be safe for all the people to come and experience God's grace. And to a certain extent, I get the heart behind it. I think it's completely misguided, though. The church shouldn't be a safe place for sinners. It should be a convicting place for sinners. Like, if I go to a church and I feel 100% safe there every time I hear a message, I don't think I'm at a Bible believing church, because I need to leave recognizing that I'm a sinner, that I need to be convicted and changing my life. And that comes to politics too. So with that in mind, one of the things that I would say is, I'm curious if you'd agree, it seems like the theological has become political. It's not the other way around.
For sure.
Is that fair?
Yeah, it's and that's where the left was so clever in convincing churches that we shouldn't be involved in politics, that the separation of church and state means that churches should stay out of everything political, because once they can get churches to believe that, to accept that, then all they have to do is make everything political. And so we've kind of boxed ourselves into this like ever shrinking like little realm of things that we can talk about, because everything else is political. And I think that's the error a lot of gospel-centered churches, it's kind of where they find themselves now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we want to just focus on the gospel, so we're not going to talk about all these things, and it just gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah, the Overton window for sermons shrinks
it shrinks
to a certain place where now it's just milk. It's not solid food, and
and even churches that are faithfully preaching through all of the passages, expositionally, and they get to passages that speak to the political in our world. There's a tendency to avoid application of those passages and just kind of let congregants, apply it and trust that you'll know how to apply this. And we're just going to talk about just the text without any application. And I think the people in the pews are getting so much discipling from the world on these issues. I think it's a mistake to think that, they will know how to draw those applications themselves.
Yeah, no, that's good. One of the arguments I've made, and one of the things I do when I talk to some churches and church leadership, is tell them that oftentimes when we're planning teaching or we're planning our missions focus in the local church, we're still thinking 1995 cultural Christianity. That people who walk through our doors have similar moral values, and we just need to show them that Jesus will save them from their sins. But most people walk in thinking that sin isn't a thing, if they even know what it means, that they're fully within the right, self-righteous, and that self-righteousness has got to be broken down. And it comes to politics as well, to say, no, we're going to stand here. This is where we're going to stand. And if it offends you, we're sorry that emotionally impacts you, but we're not sorry for the offense, because the cross is offensive. And I think a lot of these are gospel issues. And I have made the case that progressive Christianity has become the new cultural Christianity. It has supplanted Orthodox Christianity. So when people say they're Christians and they walk into your church and you think, oh, let's just plug you into small group, you don't realize what they probably mean is they're somebody who has some progressive ideals because they were raised in a certain system in our progressive cultural Christianity that likes Jesus, but they don't have the right Jesus. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like I'm on the right track there, or are we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a much bigger problem than I think anyone is really talking about much now. Trying to think if I can share a story, how to share it sensitively. Okay, yeah. So I know of someone who was reported to HR for sharing Bible verses in a Christian Slack channel at their big Fortune 500 company by other people who claim to be Christians. And I think it just points, she was reported for posting Bible verses that were offensive to LGBT people. And I think that's what we're dealing with, is the term Christian has become so expansive that there's a lot of intermingling that is going on. And so, and it really comes back to the church. We've not done a good job discipling, and we've made everything so focused on let's just preach Jesus and his resurrection. The whole Andy Stanley thing of unhitching the Bible or the Old Testament and just making it's just all about Jesus's resurrection. Let's throw off everything else to make the gospel, to make becoming a Christian appealing. Get rid of all of the stumbling blocks, all of the obstacles to someone, following Jesus. And that's left us with like a whole generation of Christians who don't know their Bible, who don't know how to recognize that, progressive Christianity is not actual Christianity. And it's like we've got to get back to preaching and teaching the whole counsel of God, the whole book. It's all applicable to our life, and it's all relevant to the world we find ourselves in.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get to the election, but before that, one of the things that triggered when you said that was What we've also done is we've allowed our culture to redefine certain terms like love, truth, justice, and marriage, even.
Yep.
And so now, do you know who Richard Hayes is? He's
Yeah.
yeah. So I just am starting his book, The Widening of God's Mercy. So I'm only through the introduction and a little bit of the first chapter. It just came out yesterday. But a lot of what you just said falls in line with that. It's this, oh, yeah, even in the introduction, he says, oh, these arguments about what specific passages say what are boring and shallow, and we just need to focus on Jesus. Uh,
Yeah.
well, okay, but what does Jesus do? Like, what, why did Jesus do what he did, and why does he call us to live a life and all that he teaches? And what does he
hmm
teach? That sort of thing. So, all we could talk about other things till the cows come home. Maybe we will do that again some other time. But specifically, we've got less than 2 months until a pretty consequential election. So we do need to be involved in our local elections, but we also need to be involved nationally to love our neighbors as ourselves. How do you think Christians should think of the 2024 election? We've got two candidates. I was a vocal supporter of Ron DeSantis in the primaries. In fact, he had dropped out by the time Nebraska had their primaries, and I wrote his name in during the primary. So I am not a Trump sycophant by any stretch of the imagination. But given the two options, and there are only two options, he seems to be the one that I tell people he's the option that gives us the best chance to limit evil.
hmm
I don't even call him the lesser of two evils. It's the best option, his administration, to limit evil. That's how I see it. How do you see it?
Yeah, I see it the same way. You know, I think there are legitimate arguments for not voting for the lesser of two evils. There's some Christian, I think, in Christian liberty, I have to allow that some Christians, should that just pricks their conscience. They cannot violate their conscience. I wouldn't argue that they should violate their conscience. I don't find those arguments persuasive. But what I can say without a doubt is Christians cannot vote for the greater of two evils. That is just not an acceptable. And in this election, it is abundantly clear which candidate is the greater of two evils. Even on the issue of abortion, I do not like, where Trump has gone this election, the positions he's kind of staked out this election cycle. But comparing the two candidates, it's still clear that Kamala Harris is going to be far, far worse on abortion and a whole range of other issues. So I
Yeah.
don't think there's any ethical dilemma whatsoever in voting for Trump, just because you're not endorsing everything about the man and everything about that he's ever said or done, or everything that he is, claiming to support with regards to abortion or what have you. It's just it's like you said, it's a choice between which administration is going to be more conducive to enacting policies that are going to be good and based in Christian values, and which administration is going to have more people in it that are Christians that would be advocating for the things that we would support, and that the choice is clear.
Yeah, I think people don't think about like the cabinet and advisors portion of it much. They just think about who's going to be sitting in the executive chair. One of the things that Trump has done is he's run from Project 2025. And so I have had the unfortunate, sometimes I'm a glutton for punishment. And so I read all of Project 2025. So I've read 900 pages of policy. It is honestly a milquetoast conservative political platform. That's all it is. And there's even some things in it that I go, wow, you do not go far enough here. Like I said, I am too conservative for Project 2025. I would dismantle most of the executive and they don't want to dismantle all of it. Anyway, he's run from some of those things, but those are the type of people that are going to be advising him.
Mhm.
And I think that's a net good. And we've seen the type of people that are going to be advising Kamala Harris. And to me, if you just put up those two rosters next to each other, like Ben Carson or JD Vance or Tim Walz, right? Or Ben Carson or Pete Buttigieg, right? It's like to me, you start to look down the roster and you go, it's not even a contest.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that gets. I think the reason some Christians are struggling and not seeing that it comes to, it really speaks to how we view politics. I think most Christians view it as just an icky, realm, and everyone that is involved in politics is just slimy. They've sold out. There aren't any good people, and that's just not the case. Like there are good people on the Republican side that are working to advance a Christian agenda, for lack of a better term. There are people there, and they are working, tons of people at the Heritage Foundation and so many different like policy, the kind of organizations that will be staffing the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And I want them wielding political power. I want Christians in those places. I want to keep the leftist radicals that Kamala surrounds herself with. I want to keep them far from power, and I think that is enough to justify voting for Trump.
Yeah, when Kamala launches her political campaign on RuPaul's Drag Race,
right,
and unironically, right, like, and asking them to vote, like, to me, it's like her seal of approval isn't just on horrific fiscal policy, which it still is horrific fiscal policy.
Yeah.
It's on a bankrupt moral framework, especially sexual moral framework.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I've argued is that Kamala Harris is, and Tim Walz are, not just Marxist sympathizers like Joe Biden was kind of a Marxist sympathizer, but they are going to try to implement purely Marxist policies. And so I've heard people have said, well, you don't know anything about Marxism. It's like you don't know anything about Marxism because it's not classical Marxism. It's like, even if she wanted to be classical Marxist, she couldn't say it because she would never get elected. Like, it's still not that. But when you got socialism as one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness, which is what Tim Walz said, or you say unrealized capital gains should be taxed, or equality of outcome is to be desired, those are specifically right out of the Marxist playbook. But some people might not be convinced of that, and they might say, well, she's not really a Marxist. And by the way, you can oppose her bad policies to keep Trump out of office because he's just so dangerous. I've had people say that to me. I'm sure you've had people say it to you. How do we respond to that when Christians who are concerned about Trump's character and, rightly concerned to whatever degree about January 6th, how do we respond to, well, he's just so dangerous, and she's not really a Marxist, and plus our system of checks and balances will keep those types of policies from enacting?
Yeah, I think Christians who follow that, well, I think there's two categories. I think there's some that are just playing us. They are actual leftists. They are trying to, I think that the whole Evangelicals for Harris crowd fits in this bucket. They are playing on your Christian your worldview. They're trying to spin it that is the Christian.
The
Christian
Jesus
option.
was a Marxist crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Shane Claiborne's, those people. And I don't think we need to listen to them at all. They are not Christian in any sense of the word. They are for abortion. They are for all the Marxist policies. They can be disregarded. I think there are other Christians that look at it as Trump is worse in the long term because our side is becoming corrupted, by allowing Trumpism to come in, and so they are kind of their gambit is that, we should bite the bullet and take a Kamala just to root out Trumpism from the Republican Party, and a resounding defeat is going to do that. And to those people, I would say you're playing God. You're trying to achieve an outcome that your vote is in no way guaranteeing. It's a stab in the dark. I mean, he officially lost in 2020, and he's still here. It didn't have the effect that you're saying is going to have this go around. What's the plan? Just kind of keep giving it to the left until he dies. There's not going to be a successor. He's got a lot of kids. I think some of them are going to want a shot too. So it's trying to do too much with your vote. You cannot predict the outcomes that far. Like, okay, if this happens, then this happens, and this will happen, and then suddenly we'll have this pure GOP that is only giving us, Christian, strong Christian men, DeSantis or whoever. That's not guaranteed, and to put that much faith in those kind of chain reaction outcomes is just really kind of ludicrous. And I think you just got to zero in on, like, okay, what are we actually voting for? Which administration do we think would be better for the country for the next 4 years? That's it. Don't think it's more than that, because it's not.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there too. One of the things I would say in regards to that as well is, that might be a tactic that we looked at in 2020. Do you feel like that was accomplished? Like, I do think that was generally some people's reason in 2020. Hey, if he doesn't win, somebody like Ron DeSantis, who was very popular in 2020, very popular. In fact, if there had been a presidential election in 2021 and he had been running, I wonder if he would have beat Trump out for a primary. But because it takes 4 years, some of that momentum was lost. Anyway, so I say that didn't work in the past, and it's interesting because for me, it does bother me that the Republican platform has been stripped of some very important things. It does bug me that the tent has become so wide because the left has become so radical. I made a comment on Twitter recently that when RFK Jr. endorsed Trump, that don't get it twisted. RFK Jr. is not anywhere in any way even close to a conservative. He about 10 years ago, he would have been considered a radical, right? And that's how far we've moved. And to say that's the part that gets me a little bit concerned is, boy, our tent is getting very big, and it seems like it's just normal people against what I would consider Marxist and communists. That's like the fight for this election, and maybe that's what it needs to be. But to your point, I don't know what it's going to be like 4 years from now. I just know what the ramifications will probably be if a certain group wins this time. And I also don't think Trump is near. I don't think he has near the energy or the care or the desire for power to say after he's 82 he wants to stay in power and be a tyrant. To me, and you know who I think agrees? Joe Biden. Because did you see just yesterday he put on a Trump hat?
Yeah.
See that? Do you think he would do that if he thought Trump was literally Hitler?
No.
Yeah.
I don't know what Biden's thinking these days.
That's true. He might not be able to think in general. And that's not a slight. I'm just saying, factually speaking, how that man hasn't been 25th Amendmented is beyond me. Okay, so what if someone says to us, well, okay, the Republican platform is basically pro-choice now. It's 1990s Democrat policy on abortion, safe, legal, and rare. How can you vote for Trump now that he's effectively pro-choice? And I've had multiple friends say this to me. What is your response to the person that says that? He's basically pro-choice. Why vote for him?
Yeah, I would say that I agree that I don't like that he removed the language from the party platform. I don't like some of the things he's said. But I would also remind you that he is the first Republican running for president after Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And the positions that he is staking out, I don't really think it's much different than we would get from a Romney or McCain, that Christians had no qualms voting for. They were always for all the exceptions, rape, incest, life of the mother. They would not have supported a, total abolition. They would have wanted, limits at some point, throughout the pregnancy. And so it's not as drastically different from previous Republican candidates as we've kind of been led to believe. Not saying I support it. I opposed those guys' positions. I didn't think they were pro-life enough. But I think there's a lot of people jumping on that weren't going to vote for him anyway. And this is, they're using this as kind of a wedge to, split support off from him, because they just prefer the other side. And so I think a lot of us are too easily manipulated by that. And I think, you just got to weigh the two administrations side by side. And one of them, Tim Walz signed a repealed, legislation that protects babies after they're born in a botched abortion. And they fact checked that on the debate the other night, but they were totally wrong. I saw the stats, like something like 8 babies have died since that legislation was vetoed.
Yeah, it's a unique sleight of hand that they use to say, because technically what she said is true. It's not legal to actively plunge a knife into the neck of a baby after it's born. But that's not what Trump was saying. He's saying, hey, there's a botched abortion. And I mean, he even just said it, and you just leave the baby to die. He's not articulate.
No, he's not.
He's not articulate. He's saying what we say, just in an unarticulate way. So they fact check his inarticulateness when everyone knows what he's talking about. He brings up Ralph Northam. Oh, Northam never said that. There's the amount of gaslighting that goes into some of this is beyond me. The don't believe your lying ears. Oh, that was never said. Here's the literal video. Oh, well, I'm still going to say it was never said, and so that's like the sleight of hand. Yeah, it's not legal to actively kill them, but when you don't render them assistance and you set them to the side, as a medical professional, you are actively killing them because you could save them, right? So we totally agree on that front. And I agree with you. I just said to a friend the other day that I don't think, and I went all the way back to Reagan. I said, I don't think any of the Republican candidates, even as far as Reagan, would have much of a different policy than Trump does on leave abortion to the states. Because Roe was such an easy thing to pinpoint, because even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was a poorly decided. So it was easy to do that. This is much more difficult. And we talked about this a little bit before we hopped on here. Trump didn't necessarily deny completely that he would, or he didn't say that he would veto legislation on a federal abortion ban. He avoided that answer, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, and for all of the missteps he took during that debate and all the stupid bait that he jumped at and talked about things he shouldn't have, he did not. He was surprisingly good at sidestepping the direct questions. Will you veto a national ban? And I think he knows that, evangelicals, that's our big issue. And if he wants our support, and I think he knows it was faltering in recent days. And I was impressed with how he handled that. He did not jump for the easy answer that he could have given, and he left it ambiguous enough to think that, I don't know, he might support that if that ever made it to his desk. Yeah.
And I think his reaction to his misstep with the Florida bill, showed, at least to me, that if you can get the right people around him, he actually can be convinced of
Yeah.
what is right and good. Now, he's generally going to be convinced for selfish reasons. he's he's not an altruistic man. He's
Hmm.
a very pragmatic man. So I'm not under any sort of I've said to people, I don't think he's a Christian, and I've had members of even family be like, "Oh no, he's expressed faith in Jesus." Go, yeah, he's
Hmm.
politically propped up Christianity because he knows he needs the evangelical vote. There's nothing about him that I would say, "Oh, look, fruits of the spirit." Seems like he really knows who Jesus is and what he's done. Maybe the near death experience might change something, but what I think it really did was just make him angry, um, which is fair. If I got shot at,
Yeah.
I might be a little angry as well. Um, so what if there are people in my life? In fact, there's somebody that is a well known Christian philosopher that has made the statement that he is going to vote for Kamala Harris uh, because he wants to because he thinks that's the only way to. It's like the David French argument, right? Like to save conservatism, we must destroy conservatism
Hmm.
or something like that. But basically, he says a consistent Christian can oppose Kamala's policies, but vote for her anyway. And plus, making abortion illegal doesn't seem to drive down the abortion rate, which is I call it the Phil Vischer argument for abortion. He says, "Hey, the pro-life's total person's goal is to lessen abortion." And I've always said, well, that's an ancillary goal. Actually, the goal is to make all forms of murder illegal. That that's the goal. So, what do you say to somebody who says, "Hey, a consistent Christian can vote for Trump or Kamala Harris and oppose vocally their policies," because there are some policies I think a Christian should oppose with Trump.
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
and so they're saying, well, why can't it be the same thing for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I would say that argument does not work because we wouldn't do that with any other crime against another person. We're not talking about, victimless sins. We're not talking about criminalizing adultery or that's not even victimless, but,
Yeah.
looking at porn, those kind of things. We're talking about a crime against another human being. And we would never say, well, actually, if you decriminalize rape, the numbers actually go down. So we're going to do that, or slavery, or anything, child abuse. The numbers go down if you don't criminalize it. It's just ridiculous on its face, and I think it betrays what these Christians actually think of the unborn, that they are somehow lesser human beings. And I think
Mm.
that just gets back to, I think, a lot of the failures of the pro-life movement. I'm very sympathetic to the abolitionists in a lot of their critiques of the pro-life movement, just in the way that I think we've borrowed a lot of ideas and methodology from the seeker-sensitive church world, in that we talk about abortion in ways to soften it, to make it more palatable.
Mm.
We don't want to, heaven forbid, we show any images of what an abortion actually is. They, don't like it when protesters go out and do that. We want to kind of sanitize it. And I even saw in the Ohio referendum last year, one of the arguments for it was that we need to. It was highlighting the danger of all of the abortion pills, that these abortion pills are bad for the environment. So we shouldn't legalize this because of how it
Yeah.
will hurt the environment. And it's like, okay, we are so missing
Yeah.
the plot here.
It's fighting the left using the left, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't work. Like we're going to play in their playground and fight according to their rules, Uh, so if they say it's just a clump of cells, and we go, well, what about at 6 weeks? Like it's
Yeah.
got like
uh,
it's not a clump
Right.
of cells. It's completely different DNA. You're completely scientifically and theologically wrong.
Hmm.
And what you want to, and so I've said the same thing. Softening language, like that's why I call it murder. And there have been pastors that have said, just that hurts people. Don't call it murder, because what if they've had an abortion? I said, well, then Jesus' blood is still shed for them, but they need to recognize what they've done.
Hmm.
Like, imagine using that with any other sin. Like, imagine using that for a man who looks at porn, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, well, we do that, right? Even with porn, we go, well, I got a problem with lust. I had
Hmm.
a conversation with a college kid the other day, and goes, I got a lust problem, blah blah blah. And I kind of said, hey, can we just call it what it is? You're looking at porn. You got a porn problem. You're addicted to it. You got to name it. It's the same with any thing, is to say abortion is murder, and if it's murder, we should call it that,
Yep.
and not apologize for it. But what if someone says, oh no, I agree. It's just I think Kamala Harris has policies that are going to soften the impact, and plus her federalizing Roe isn't going to work. It'll never pass. So, because they'll have to get 60 votes, they'll never get 60 votes. So, at least if she's in there, they'll enact policies that will lessen abortion, allow the pro-life movement to move forward, and um, and then we can oppose some of her other policies, just like you would oppose policies for Trump.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point, I would have to start broadening their view to other issues as well. Just, the immorality of her economic policies, that those are not, the redistribution of wealth is not biblical. It violates several of the Ten Commandments. Not least of which is thou shalt not steal.
Mhm.
Taking from one, it encourages covetousness. Um, the whole panoply of sexual immorality that the left is enthralled with now. I just think if your moral scales can't recognize that the left is far worse than the alternative, I just, man, they're just
Yeah.
not working.
Well, especially when you consider her running mate's position on even just transgender surgery for minors, right?
Yeah.
And how he's, they call him Tampon Tim, and they go, and so they make that the big deal. Well, what's the big deal about having um, tampons in boys' locker rooms or boys' bathrooms? So they use this thing to be like, it's just ludicrous. Like, no, the law that he supports is that a kid can be taken away from their parents if they want to transition.
Hmm.
Like, that's what I'm talking about. And how is
Yeah.
that, to me, like, they talk about women's rights and families' rights, and I think you're not for families' rights. You're for families' rights so long as they agree with you,
Hmm.
right? And so I agree. I think you got to point to the what I would ask. I think too is, okay, well, what policies are good?
Hmm.
Like, I haven't. I don't know. I don't know that I found one.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of
But
presuppositions they bring to that argument too, that
mm,
the reason women procure abortions is purely economics. Like, they wouldn't do this if they didn't have to, and if we had better economic policies, then those numbers would go down. um, I think, at that point, it's like there's we have decades of data to show how these policies harm people, especially the African American community has just been decimated by the Great Society programs
mhm.
trying to rectify these sort of things. And I think just doubling down on that, it's not going to provide any solution to the problem. And I think, if even granting, if the numbers go down, I think they get so worked up when Republicans are in office that they're going to take away our abortions, that I think that probably has an effect on them running out to get them,
Yeah,
as an uh, I don't know, before it's too late.
yeah, yeah. And it's also like, to me, I go, okay, even if that were true, and I do recognize that more abortions occurred this year than has ever occurred to me, it just means what I've told people is we're just in a new battlefield. Like Roe's only
Mhm.
been gone for a little while. We're still trying to navigate this, and the pro-abortion movement has years of head start and access and in communication across state lines. Like we were very nationally oriented, and now we have to be more locally oriented
Yeah,
in the
we were
pro-life.
totally unprepared for Roe to be overturned.
Yeah, yeah, and it was the cynicism that it would never be returned.
Mhm.
I'll never forget Phil Fisher's video. I think it was in 2020 that said he basically said, "Well, Roe will never get because Republicans have never put justices in it. It's just the way it is going to be." And then I'm pretty sure, like 6 months later,
Yeah.
that's when Roe got overturned. Um, but all of that to say, like, uh, that's just 1 year of data.
Mhm.
So even if that data is accurate, to use that to say, oh well, if we're really pro-life, we should look at these other issues that are proven to limit abortions. Um, I to me, I go, well, then that means we're just looking for the acceptable amount of murder.
Mhm.
It's like, what is a baseline amount of murder that we can feel good? If it's 1.4 million abortions, and then a year after it was 1 million abortions, we're still talking about 2.4 million people
Yeah.
that were killed. And so, like, I know that unfortunately, abortion is a long march to eradication. I pray that we can get there, and I hope we don't lose heart. But um, I do think that I don't find any of Kamala Harris's policies convincing in that regard. If you can
And that's
even
not
name
an
it,
aim. They're not
yeah,
trying to do that.
no, yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Have you ever heard them say, uh, "Well, really, what we want to do is make abortion on that's kind of the progressive Christians term is to make it unthinkable because everyone's so well taken care of."
Mhm.
I've never heard a Democrat politician say that. So,
Yeah.
say, "Oh no, what we want to do is make it economically good for people to have babies." They constantly say we want to give women back their rights to their bodies, which is the most euphemistic nonsense
Mhm.
um, in the world. So I sent you this question a friend of mine sent, and I think we'll end on this because this kind of talks about what we were just talking about. It says statistics seem to indicate that social programs have a positive effect on abortions, i.e., reducing them. So they should be considered in a person's pro-life position. It should be secondary to the more direct policy that abortion should be illegal, but it should still be considered. That means that in an election between two pro-choice candidates, Donald Trump is effectively pro-choice, I suppose, and Kamala Harris is pro-abortion. Other policies should be considered. If you want abortion to be illegal, but you don't want to consider any policies that seem to correlate with a decrease in abortions, you might be part of the problem that is pointed out by the increase in abortions post Roe. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it highlights uh, a real area where I think there's a lot of opportunity for pro-lifers to think. I mean, we are coming. The birth rates are declining precipitously, and I think there is a lot we can do policy-wise to encourage families, to encourage large families. Um, I think it was Viktor Orban. Uh, is he Hungary? I think.
Yeah.
Um, I think it was there where they said families over four don't pay any income tax because they recognize that we need, and so I think there's a lot of things that conservatives can embrace to promote families, but that's got to go. That's got to coincide with the other side, and I don't think you can justify a policy that encourages abortions, that wants to make them available from conception to birth. Um, it's just you're at cross purposes there. You can't be promoting bringing life if you're promoting a culture of death. And I think,
Mm.
but on the other side, I do think conservatives need to think kind of holistically of like how can we incentivize people to um, get married, stay married. Like, what can we do about no fault divorce? What can we do about making porn illegal? I love how nobody was talking about that, and Dusty Devers introduced some legislation and just like, nope, we're going to jerk the Overton way over here. This is in the Overton now, and yeah, there's all kinds of pro-family policies that we need to be considering, as well as what we can do to bring justice for the unborn.
Yeah, well, and I think JD Vance, before Kamala stole it and put $1,000 more on it, was saying $5,000 tax credit for each kid, and then he said, I don't think this would ever happen. I can't remember if it was him or someone else, but someone said, if you have more than 3 kids, it probably borrowed from Viktor Orban, but if you have more than 3 kids, I think they were saying, and you stay married, you get a vote for each child you have in the house. Like, you get to vote. So for me, I've got 3 kids. We would each have, like, my wife and I would both have 5 votes, because we've got, or 4 votes because we have 3 kids and ourselves. That would never necessarily pass. No. I don't know. But it's like thinking outside of the box, like you're saying, that you can incentivize life without also being pro-death. And one of the things I would say is, but Kamala isn't just pro-choice. She's pro-abortion. She's pro-death. Like, she wants to federalize it, and that makes fighting against it so much harder. God forbid if it happens. If even there's a 5% chance that in 4 years she's in office, she will have the Senate and the Congress large enough to be able to, let's say there's a 5% chance she would sign Roe into law, and there's a 2% chance Trump would sign an abortion ban. I'm going to go with the 2% chance that Trump will sign the abortion ban, and not go, well, there's a 95% chance that abortions won't be federalized legally across all states. To me, it like that cuts completely against our fight now. And someone asked, well, do you think the Supreme Court would uphold such a law if Congress made it? And I said, yeah, they would. I don't think the Supreme Court would overrule federal legislation signed by the executive to make Roe the law of the land. I don't think they would do it. I'd love to be wrong. I just don't think they would. That's like a 0.5% chance. So any thoughts on that? Like,
yeah, I mean, you just cannot. You have to recognize that the Democrat Party, abortion is their sacrament. It's a secular religion, and that is their sacrifice for the freedom of women, and they are happy to give it. It is not. It's not something that they're trying to reduce. The whole safe, legal, rare thing is gone. It's something that would be one thing, I guess, if you're being charitable, if they were putting forward policies like, this is how we reduce abortion. They don't want to reduce abortion. They think abortion is good. They encourage the Shout Your Abortion movement, and just the sickening things you see on social media of women celebrating getting an abortion, and that is what that party stands for. And I just don't see how a Christian can square. There's just too many mental gymnastics you have to do to get to a vote for the Democrats is a vote to reduce abortions.
Yeah, and I would say too that the calculus might change depending on which administration is going against which one. Like, let's say Tulsi Gabbard won the Democrat nomination. She is almost on the right considering abortion now. I think she championed a 16-week limit, which is obviously untenable for you and me at the same time. But it's basically Trump's position. She basically has Trump's position on abortion. So if it was Trump against her, I think that argument would make would make much more sense than an administration that's clearly going to incentivize. And I think even if she doesn't get an abortion Roe into law federally, I think she's going to do all that she can to make it as accessible as possible for as long as possible. So there's going to be executive orders on abortion pills. There's going to be working with state legislators to put vague constitutional amendments like the one in Kansas. I have family that lives in Kansas, and they said that would not have passed if it had been worded differently, but people were confused and just voted yes on it. And because people get confused, and then they're in the voting booth and they're like, yes. I mean, what's the worst? So there were a lot of people that go, oh, I didn't know I was voting for that. And I think that's going to be a strategy. People need to realize that it's not just, oh, we want to take care of people. It's, oh, no, we want to make sure that abortions can occur on demand, whenever and wherever. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that in this conversation, there's not really this isn't a conversation between two people that are on opposite sides of the spectrum. We are on the same wavelength as far as it goes. I guess I want to end with this thought. Churches, we talked about this, are very, very reticent to get involved in the election, and specifically, even unfortunately, in the abortion conversation. I was very proud of my church recently because we actually did sign we had the petition for the amendment in Nebraska. Now the amendment isn't strong enough for my taste, because all it does is say the abortion laws that currently are going to stay and can't be changed, and can't be changed by a constitutional amendment unless they're changed towards pro-life. So they can't be made worse. That's basically the amendment. And I told people I don't like it, but the other amendment that's on the ballot is basically overruling the current law and saying abortion's on demand up until birth. I was like, between the two options, this is the one. And so our church actually hosted a petition signing after service and encouraged people to go sign it. And it's on the ballot now in November. So what would you say to people who are in churches that seem reticent to, and they might be Bible-believing churches that are generally good on most things, but reticent to engage on political and those social topics?
Yeah, well, I would say the world has changed since Roe was overturned. I think a lot of churches support crisis pregnancy centers, and I think we should totally keep doing that. They do great work. But I think a lot of churches felt like, okay, that's it. There's nothing we can do about overturning Roe. Our hands are tied. So the best we can do is provide this alternative. And that's no longer the case. It has been sent back to the states, and it is a tooth and nail fight for the lives of unborn in the states. And so I think we have to recognize that, number one, and then we need to become comfortable speaking to this and encouraging our people to be active on this issue at the state level. And I think that includes, encouraging Christians to run for office and to know, hey, if you run for office, you got a whole church of people here that are going to be behind you, going to be going door to door, going to be calling and doing the mailers, and not feel like, oh, we can't do that. That's political. We can't do that, because it really is. We're called to be a salt and light in our communities and to fight for justice. And that's politics is one way that we do that. And I think churches just have to become comfortable doing that in this new world that we find ourselves in. And I think the main reason people don't do that, churches don't want to do that, is because we have bought into this idea that it's up to us to make converts, that we've got to keep all of these controversial topics away so that people can come in, hear the gospel, and get saved. And we've forgotten that it's the gospel that is the power of God unto salvation. And so we're not God's PR agents trying to make it palatable. We are ambassadors for Christ, and we need to represent what the King Christ believes, what he advocates for, what he is all about here on earth, and trust that the Holy Spirit is going to be working in the lives of people that may come into our churches, and see that we are, working for the protection of the unborn.
Yeah, that's so good. That's a good. Yeah, I know that you and I have both had conversations and talked about Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale. I think one of the most poignant stories in that book is when she talks about a person who wrote about Tim Keller's death and had become a Christian, but because Tim Keller refused to talk about these sorts of issues, and when she found out this is the cost, she was like, "Oh, I would have never become a Christian." So she became apostate because of that. And so I think also to warn people that is also a cost. Like when you seek to make the gospel palatable, you rob it of its power, and people then become converted to a gospel that is no gospel at all. It's a gospel of self-actualization, and I feel good because I know God exists and I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Oh, but I didn't count the cost. Jesus said, "Hey, count the cost." I mean, he's the one that said it. It's not me. You're not arguing with me. Jesus said, "Who among you, before you start a project, won't sit down to count the cost? What general, before he gets into a battle, will not sit down to count the cost?" We need to help people count the cost before they come to the gospel. That means we have to be honest about what the gospel is. And that's probably my number one issue with Andy Stanley's way of doing things, is that he's done that for so long. And because he's done that for so long, he's now become completely compromised. And this is someone I learned to preach from the Andy Stanley School of Preaching. Like I read his book, I learned all that stuff. And I have an article on my website called The Curious Case of Andy Stanley, where I break down the fact that he's fallen away because he thinks it's his job to be the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
And because he thinks, oh, LGBTQ people, that's a special sin that God can't touch, which is antithetical to anything in Scripture, even if you want to unhitch from the Old Testament, right? So I think we got to be honest. We got to be honest what the gospel is, and people count the cost. I think we can agree with that.
Yep.
Well, thanks for joining me, Josh. I appreciate the conversation. Where can people find you again? Where's the best places to find you at?
Yeah, best places on Twitter, X, at Josh Daws. I'm usually there. And then you can find The Great Awakening on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All
right. Well, I think it's safe to say that we've solved all the world's problems in this podcast today. And everyone will now have the right way. But hopefully, if you're watching this, you'll understand that it's not partisanship. It's trying to be faithful so that people will know that God really loves them, how he loves them, and loves their neighbor. And I personally think the best way to do that in this election season is to be active and to vote for Donald Trump. So, and I think Josh agrees.
Yep.
Because we're both named Josh, so we're both right.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you. We'll see you next time. And as we say on FreeThinking Ministries, stay reasonable.